All right, good morning, guys. Let's get going. If you're out in the lobby, if you can hear my voice, grab your coffee. You can do registrations later if you need to. Let's get going. Got a lot to cover today. But welcome to team on week 2. Just in case you're here for the first time today, I saw a bunch of guys registering today. So we know on any given Friday, like 20% of our guys are traveling or working or something. So welcome if this is your first time here. The way it works is you sort of register on your own. Payment is on the honor plan. It's $50 for the whole season once you're committed. But you can fill out those registration cards out of the table in the front. Or you could just make sure you sign in at the table you're in today. Every table should have a sheet on it. Just write your name, print it so we can see it. And if you're not registered yet and we don't have your email, just put your email real clearly so we can see it. But if you're already registered, you're getting emails from me, just write your name on there. We just keep track of how the tables are shaping up for the first month or so. And the way it works is we let a lot of these tables have sort of been set from last year. That's kind of how we start off the new year. But we have like 40 new guys this year, so we sprinkled them throughout the tables. And so tables may swell or shrink, and that's fine. If you see somebody you know and you're new over on the other side of the room and they have an empty chair there, go sit at that table if you want to. We're fine with moving around the first month or so, and then eventually we'll sort of settle in. This is our table group for the year. So that's how that works. But every week we want you to sign in just so we know who's at that table. And if you're new, put your email. That's how it works. Table leaders, so a few of you, we ran out of table leader books last week. So if you're a table leader, you did not get your table leader book, we have some extras up here. You can get them at the discussion time. We kind of filled in the blanks so you at least have those to work on while we try to make some more. And if you don't have a team booklet, there's stacks of them out there at the table in the lobby. You can get one there too to follow along. In fact, you should probably get one as I start here so you can follow along the session today, but they're out at the lobby out there. All right, here's our story for today. I know you're waiting. The captain called the sergeant in. Sarge, I just got a telegram that Private Jones' mother died yesterday. Better go tell him and send him in here to see me. So the sergeant calls for his morning formation and lines up all the troops. Listen up, men, says the sergeant. Johnson, report to the mess hall for KP. Smith, report to personnel to sign some papers. The rest of you men report to the motor pool for maintenance. Oh, by the way, Jones, your mother died. Report to the commander. Later that day, the captain called the sergeant into his office. Hey, Sarge, that was a pretty cold way to inform Jones that his mother passed away. Couldn't you be a bit more tactful next time? Yes, sir, said the Sarge. A few months later, the captain called the sergeant in again and said, Sarge, you just got a telegram that Private McGrath's mother died. You better go tell him and send him in here to see me. This time, be more tactful. So the sergeant calls for his morning formation. Okay, men, fall in and listen up. Everybody with a mother, take 2 steps forward. Not so fast, McGrath. Sometimes empathy isn't our greatest gift. I'm going to show you a clip today from a movie that I saw a couple of years ago, and I've used it before. It's a movie called Paul, Apostle of Christ. And usually, biblically oriented films are kind of cheesy, in my opinion, but this one was not, at least not that much so. The scene you're going to see takes place in a Roman prison when Paul and Luke, his dear friend Luke, are both in prison as enemies of Rome under Nero's emperorship. And they're having a conversation with the captain who's running this prison. Paul is the one with the big beard. And so just listen to the conversation, and it's a takeoff point for us today. So take a look.
How can it be that by words alone you spit in the face of the emperor? By words alone, you seem to defy Rome itself. Words do not threaten to destroy empires.
Because perhaps they are not just words. They are the truth of things.
You keep saying truth. Truth. But it is only a truth according to you. If it were the only truth, everyone would believe it.
Not so. Christ, who is truth, rose from the dead. Many still do not believe.
Lies, fabrications.
If Christ had not risen from the dead, then our preaching is useless, and so is our faith.
Oh. And you have no doubts at all?
Men do not die for things they doubt.
You claim you serve a God who is above all other gods, and yet all I see before me is an old man in chains. Life. A summary of beatings and filthy prison cells.
I deserve worse. But there is grace enough for everyone.
To be rich, not poor. To be powerful, not weak. To have slaves and servants, not be one.
It does not take an intelligent man to look around and know that the world is missing something.
Do not question the greatness of Rome.
And what the love for his sick daughter, what does Rome offer her?
Another word and I send you to whatever god you want. You're right. My daughter is dying. The gods do not answer me.
There is another way.
No, there is not. Your Christ solves nothing. Mindless sentimentality for the weakest and poorest to make their pathetic state livable. Until they're buried in the ground and forgotten. Tomorrow there are games at the circus. Take the Greek there, so I can die for the glory of my gods.
No!
And may this give me favor for my daughter.
No! Luke! Luke!
You should have escaped when you had a chance. And so the man from Tarsus how Rome treats its enemies.
The guy's accent's a little hard to follow, but at the end when he says, take him to the circus in Nero's Rome was the Colosseum where they fed the Christians to wild animals. That's what they were preparing to do. Nero was also known to light his gardens by burning Christians on stakes, coating them with tar, and then burning them to light his gardens. Nero was a crazy man. But I chose you that clip for the irony of it, because the Roman captain there is in charge of the prison, and he prides himself on power. You can hear it in what he says. He prides himself on the power of Rome, the power of his own position. When he looks at Paul, all he sees is an old man filled with religious nonsense, superstitions, weak, powerless, foolish, a slave. And yet, from our perspective now, looking at that clip, the Roman Empire and all its power and glory and wealth, long gone, ruins. You can visit there. The ruins are magnificent, but they're ruins. Nero is just a footnote in history. But Paul, universally regarded as one of the most influential men who ever walked on the face of the earth, and the movement he gave his life to, the gospel and the church, that should never have survived the first century, not only survived, but thrived and changed the world. So our theme this year, as you see in the front of the booklet, is Be Salty, Becoming Men of Spiritual Influence. And week 2 today, our theme is the Upside Down Kingdom. Remember last week we started with what Jesus said to his followers in Matthew 5. You are the salt of the earth. We talked about why he chose that particular image, the image of salt. Because in that day, salt was used as a preservative. It preserved meat from corruption. Therefore, salt had enormous value in the ancient world. So Jesus is calling his followers to be people of influence, to be influencers of great value. Now, today we're going to back up just a few verses to the very beginning of Matthew chapter 5, regarded as the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, one of the most famous passages of Jesus' teaching. In fact, many people in our culture are aware of some of these teachings without knowing they came from Jesus, without knowing they come from the Sermon on the Mount. So Matthew chapter 5, first 12 verses, you're going to recognize some of these verses. So let me read them for you, and then we'll dig in a little bit. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. In those days, the rabbi would sit down to teach. In our culture, you sit down and I stand up. But they did it the opposite way back then. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." Now, I'm going to stop there. Many of you have heard these words before. This is a fabulous portion of teaching. We could take a week on each one of those sentences, but we're not going to do that. I'm going to teach them sort of all together. But if I had you go back, and I said, go back with a pen, and I want you to circle all the character descriptions in those 12 verses that match what our culture teaches you as men to aspire to, how many would you circle? Okay, let's go. Let's just go back and take a look. Verse 3, poor in spirit. Well, not really. It doesn't sound all that manly. I mean, how many football coaches stand up before their team and give a pep talk right before they run on the field? Okay, guys, let's go out there and be poor in spirit today. No, we say, let's be strong in spirit. Let's be tough in spirit. Verse 4, those who mourn. That sounds kind of mopey. Who wants to mourn? The meek, what does that even mean? Sounds kind of soft and weak. Verse 6, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Well, maybe hunger and thirst for, success or maybe that promotion. Righteousness. Verse 7, the merciful. Well, that's nice. It's a nice thing to be, but not right at the top of my list. Verse 8, the pure in heart. Well, so how pure are we talking? Verse 9, peacemakers. Well, peace is a good thing, yeah. But it's sort of someone else's job. The politicians, police, first responders, that sort of stuff. Verse 10, the persecuted. Well, no thank you. The insulted. Again, no thanks. So what is Jesus talking about here? Well, he's talking about what I'm calling the upside-down kingdom today. We're in the second week of our sessions. We're calling this the upside-down kingdom. The first thing we see here is that Jesus is always countercultural. That's the first point you need to fill in. Jesus is always countercultural. My youngest son is a senior in college at Indiana Wesleyan University down in Indiana, and he plays basketball there. And last weekend, right after team, I left to go on a retreat weekend with his teammates. It's called the Father and Son Weekend. They do it every fall. And it's a Christian university, and they really do a good job. The coaches do a really good job with these guys. Not all come from Christian backgrounds, but some do. But they do this father-son retreat, trying to get dads and sons closer together and build chemistry as a team and all that. It's a great thing. But part of the weekend, I think it was on Friday night, they do this kind of fun thing where they sort of integrate the new freshmen and the transfers. And they had them all stand up, and the coach gave them sort of this goofy quiz on manhood, what it means to be a man. And, there was a question like 10 foods that are most manly. Try to identify the parts of a straight edge razor. What's the most manly style of facial hair? That kind of stuff. But what he was getting at is our culture's idea of manhood. I just sat down. What does our culture teach us? If you're just watching TV or you're reading stuff in the media, what does our culture teach us about manhood? Well, you eat steak, you drink beer, you drive a truck, you grow a beard, axe throwing, which is kind of a thing now. You watch football and you chase women. That's pretty much the definition of manhood in our culture. And then, so they had some fun with that, and then they spent the entire weekend reinforcing what they in their program call the I am third philosophy. I am third. It's everywhere. It's on their t-shirts, it's on their locker room, and they practice I am third. That just simply means God first, others second, myself third. It's very simple. But they teach it, they coach it, they practice like that. It's a countercultural philosophy, especially for young college guys. Imagine college guys who are 21, 22 years old, and you're teaching them that. And they're competitive on top of that. Well, they're building one of the most successful small college basketball programs in the whole country and have been for about 15 years now. So Jesus is talking about his kingdom here. And his kingdom turns the kingdom of our culture upside down. I think Jesus here is introducing the distinctive characteristics of salty people. The distinctive characteristics of what it means to be salty. Remember, Jesus said, you are the salt of the earth. You who follow me, you who call yourself by my name, are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, its distinctive characteristics, he said, what's it good for? Just to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Salt preserves because it has distinct chemical properties. It's different. So what's Jesus saying? Let me go back through each one of those phrases and just give you just a sentence description, explanation of what he means by these phrases, because they sound very foreign to us. poor in spirit. That's basically the opposite of proud. See, a proud man doesn't need God. In fact, a proud man doesn't need anything. A proud man struggles to learn and grow because you can't really teach a proud man anything. But a man who is poor in spirit is not full of himself. A man who is poor in spirit recognizes that he needs God, he needs others. He realizes, spiritually speaking, that he can't save himself. Poor in spirit. Those who mourn. Jesus here is talking about a man who cares. Specifically, a man who cares about the brokenness in the world. A man who cares about the brokenness he sees inside himself. You saw that in the clip. Paul said it doesn't take an intelligent man to look at the world and see something's missing. That's what he means by a man who mourns. When he says, I deserve worse, Paul saw the brokenness inside himself. He mourns. That's what Jesus means, a man who cares. The meek. Now, meek does not mean weak. It sounds like it, but it doesn't mean it. It means a combination of humility and self-control. That is, having the power and position to do or get what you want, but being willing to lay aside one's ego and one's selfish motives on behalf of others. The meek. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. This is a man who has an appetite for virtue and justice. So as I start to describe these things to you, they start to sound a little different. And we start to get the picture of the kind of person Jesus is talking about here. The merciful, one who has empathy and grace and offers those to other people who suffer. Did you see the viral video that went around the last couple of weeks about this young kid in a high school somewhere, like a freshman, and he was being teased and bullied mercilessly because he came from a poor family and wore the same clothes to school every day? You see that? And he was a white kid. And these two African-American kids were part of the group that was harassing him. And then one of them realized that was wrong. And he started to rally around other people, said, we need to do something differently here. So they went out and bought a bunch of clothes for this kid and brought him a whole new set of clothes. And somebody took a video of this, and it's gone viral all over the nation. These two freshmen high school boys turned around and started to offer mercy to this kid. And it changed the school, and it's changing a lot of people's opinions. Merciful. The pure in heart. Now, heart here is the center of life. It's where our motives and desires live. And pure, the word there is the word you would use to purify metal, to burn it in fire, like gold, to purify gold. And so through confession and repentance, we are set free from things like selfishness and greed and lust. Pure in heart. Peacemakers, a man who's at peace with God and shares peace with others. The persecutor, the man who's willing to persevere in faith and action even when it costs him something. This is a man who's courageous in his faith. See, Jesus is talking about the unique spiritual qualities that his followers are to have. Salty qualities. And these characteristics are always countercultural. Almost always countercultural. And they're almost always powerful and influential. So that's what he's talking about. Secondly, Jesus is teaching us here that blessing isn't what you think it is. Blessing isn't what you think it is. Some of you know I made a 17-day trip in July to Turkey and Africa to visit some of our Chapel Street ministry partners in that part of the world. I was in Istanbul, Dubai, Tanzania, Zanzibar, Rwanda, and Uganda. And I was reminded of two things that I know, but two things became very, very clear. First, God is doing some amazing things through some amazing people all over the world. People that you'll never hear about, people that will never become celebrities, people that the world will never notice, but they're making an eternal impact. People like a pastor named Fred Wangwa in Uganda. Fred was born into poverty as one of 12 siblings. His father was an alcoholic who couldn't work and didn't support his family. He actually watched one of his younger siblings, a brother, die of starvation because they didn't have enough food. He realized at age 6 that if he wanted to live, he needed to work. So he went out into the fields and began to work for pennies just so he could buy food. At age 7, he found his way to a small village church where people actually cared about him and where he saw hope for the first time. He eventually, after not going to school his whole life, got into a small Bible college as a teenager and was so smart and progressed so quickly, they scholarshiped his entire education at this Bible college. And when he finished at age 22, they asked him to be the pastor of the church that found him as a street kid. So he became a pastor. Since then, which was 11 years ago, he started 10 more churches in the mountains up behind his city, trained all 10 of those pastors, and he's also the spiritual director of one of the top neurological hospitals in East Africa, Cure Hospital. Just being around this guy, I was humbled by his faith, by his vision, by his courage, by his passion under conditions that, to me, would be unimaginably difficult. His house where he lives with his wife and 5 children has no electricity most of the time. He texted me the day after I got home and said he contracted malaria, and he's now recovering from that. So I learned that, I was reminded God is doing some amazing things for some amazing people that the world will never hear about. People who match this salty description. The second thing I realized when I traveled was I'm just so soft. I'm just soft. I'm a prisoner of the first world. In many ways, I'm a prisoner of my idea of blessing. I watched Fred, this pastor in Uganda, drive a beat-up van over incredibly muddy, lousy roads to get to his church on Sunday morning, which has no air conditioning and no bathroom. To go to the bathroom at his church, you can walk outside and you find a little hut that's got a hole in the ground. That's their bathroom, okay? I get back to my hotel, and I'm frustrated that the shower's not hot enough. I get frustrated when the air conditioner doesn't quite work well enough. And I realize I'm a prisoner. I'm a prisoner. I'm captive to comfort. Because it's what our culture has taught me. It's what my culture has taught me. So often our idea of blessing matches up pretty well with our notion of the American dream. And we hear it all the time. An athlete signs a contract for $1 bazillion, and they stick a microphone in his face, and he says, I'm just so blessed to be in this position. And that's not wrong. That's true. Material wealth is a blessing, excuse me, in many ways, but that's not the blessing Jesus is talking about, is it? He turns our idea of blessing upside down. The word translated blessed means blissful, happy, or enlarged. It's more than superficial happiness. It's more than having a nice house and nice car. Jesus is talking about a deeper sense of joy of the soul. He's talking about spiritual prosperity. Notice, who does Jesus say are the blessed? Blessed are the wealthy, the successful. No. Blessed are the poor in spirit, those who mourn, the meek, those who hunger for righteousness. Why? Why does he say it that way? What's the reward? What's the promise? Then you see, for they will receive the kingdom of God, inherit the earth, be comforted, be shown mercy, be filled, see God. These are all promises that point to a much greater reality than we can even see. They're pointing to the eternal life for which we were all originally created. They're pointing to life with God that's rewarding and full, not just now, but forever. He's talking about the gospel. So here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying blessing isn't what you think it is because life isn't what you think it is. Blessing isn't what you think it is because life isn't about what our culture says it's about. And then the third thing he's teaching us is that influence is not easy. Influence is never easy. Years ago, I had a chance to travel with a team from our church to Russia. We had a partner at that time, a church in Samara, Russia, and I traveled there with a group from our church, and one Sunday I was in, the pastor there, a wonderful man named Viktor Ryagozov, invited me to preach at his church. So we got to the church, and before church started, he took me into this little room in the back of the church, kind of an office, kind of a little boardroom, and walked into this room, and there were about 9 or 10 elderly Russian men, and you don't see many elderly Russian men, at least when we were there, because millions of them died in World War II and then died in combat or from alcoholism. So there were 9 or 10 elderly Russian men, white hair, steely blue eyes, sitting around this table. And the pastor, he wanted me to meet these were his elders, he called them, his leaders of his church. And so he introduced them to me, but he didn't just say, here are my elders. This is the pastor from America who's going to preach today. He went around and he introduced each guy, but the way he did it, I'll never forget. He introduced me to each man and told me something about what his faith had cost him. He went around. He said, Pastor Brian, this is Brother Vladimir. Vladimir lost his job and his house because he's a Christian. This is Brother Boris. Boris was arrested as an enemy of the state, beaten, and was spent months in prison because he's a Christian. This is Brother Sergei. Sergei was sent to the Gulag work camp for 10 years, and he just now returned to us. He went to all 9 guys, and every single guy, the price that each one had paid got deeper and deeper and deeper. And when he finished, I thought to myself, Victor, you're asking me to preach to them? To these guys? Who have more faith in a little finger than I have in my whole body, my whole life? They're the ones who need to speak to me. I felt like I had been strengthened just by being in the same airspace that these men were in, because they had all paid a price. To have influence, by definition, you have to be different. To have influence, you have to be different. To preserve the meat, you don't become like the meat, you have to be salty. And when you are different, what happens? When you're different, you open yourself to misunderstanding, to ridicule, maybe even abuse. Now, in our country, you're not going to be arrested. Nobody's going to arrest you and throw you into prison for calling yourself a follower of Jesus. You're not going to be arrested like that, but you might be made fun of. You might be laughed at work. Somebody might think you're just a little weird. You might be called names, Bible thumper, all that kind of stuff. How does this lead to influence? I thought about the football player the athlete named Tim Tebow. You guys know who Tim Tebow is. He was the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback at the University of Florida. But he was also outspoken about his faith. He would put Bible verses on his eye black, and it would create internet sensation. People wanted to find out what Bible verses meant. The NCAA then outlawed putting anything on eye black because of Tim Tebow. Then he got to the NFL and became a quarterback. People argue about whether he was a good quarterback or bad quarterback. He didn't stick in the lead very long. But he would kneel like this in prayer before and after games, and people made fun of his praying. They called it Tebowing, and it became kind of a thing to imitate what he was doing on the field. Now he's playing minor league baseball, and people say, it's just a publicity stunt. He's just a glory hound. I listen to sports talk radio a lot here in Chicago, and there are a couple of the hosts that routinely make fun of Tim Tebow. Mainly because he's so public and unapologetic about his faith in Christ. About, for example, his commitment to virginity before marriage. He's been open about that. He talks about that. But Tim Tebow was also named one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine a few years ago. Forbes magazine named him the most influential athlete in the entire world. Many people don't know that over the course of his career, he's built a foundation, the Tim Tebow Foundation, that includes a cure hospital in the Philippines, another ministry that reaches over 90,000 special needs children every year, and events all over the world. My son's actually been in one of those in Haiti. He has an orphan ministry, an adoption ministry, and several more. But what I know about Tim Tebow is that one of his posters hangs in one of my boys' bedrooms to this day. It's been there for like 15 years. That's influence. Influence. Jesus is teaching us that to have influence, we have to be different. We have to be different from our culture. The difference is knowing Jesus, following Jesus, and allowing him to live his life through us. And that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of this whole season. Here are your discussion questions. First, how has Jesus turned things upside down for you? Now, you might think about before and after. In your life, how you saw yourself, how you see the world. It might be changed perspective, changed priorities, but how has he turned things upside down for you? Secondly, has your faith in Jesus ever gotten you into trouble? Meaning, ever caused you to be misunderstood? Ever caused you to be laughed at or ridiculed or mistreated? Has your faith ever gotten you into any kind of trouble or any kind of hot spot? So here's the way we're going to do it. You can take some time, get some more coffee, donuts, have your discussion, and about 10 till, I'll start to wrap you up. We'll send you to a short time of prayer around your table, then I'll wrap up at the end. There are prayer cards on your table. If you have something you want me to pray for or you want your group to pray for, write it down there, and you can bring it to me anytime during this time. So get some coffee, have your discussion time. I'll wrap you up starting at about 10 till.